So, is it recording? Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, still people coming. I don't think Steve is going to join. I think he's in Australia now, if I remember correctly. So I'm not sure, like, how back or forth in time he is. Okay, I would say let's start, and then if other people join, I can always accept them. So I will start sharing my screen, and I hope you can. Well, I'm not sharing my screen. Now I'm sharing my screen, hopefully. And yeah, okay, let me it's a little bit more. Why it doesn't work? Sorry. Yeah, okay, now it should work. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Well, we're seeing the presenter view.
Aha. Let me see. What about now?
Yes, perfect.
Now you see what? Okay. So today I'll be talking about two projects actually. One is called Honesty Project. Oh, wait. Oh yeah, okay. One is called the Honesty Project, and the other one is called PRODEMINFO. And the reason why I'll be talking about this project together is because, well, first of all, they're very similar. Like they're quite similar. They have a few overlaps. To be more specific, like the Honesty Project has already ended. It ended in July. And so there are already a few like outcomes in terms of publications. So some of them are work in progress. And whereas PRODEMINFO is still going, it's a longer project. It's a 5-year project. But again, there are some overlaps, and me and Christoph will go through them separately. These, just as a reference, is the people working on both projects. Some of us have been working on Honesty more, like me or Jana. Some of us have been working on PRODEMINFO more, but there is no really clear cut between the two teams. And also mention of honor for Richard Westway, who's the project manager of both of them. And two principal investigators are Steve and David Garcia from University of Constance. So again, I may say something that maybe some of you already know, so please forgive me for that. The idea for both of these projects starts with a simple conundrum. So how come that some politicians may well, repeatedly lie and still be considered as honest by the people, by some people at least? Okay. And the idea of this, well, we try to solve this conundrum like by hypothesizing a new conception of honesty, or better, like the hypothesis is that honesty is not a single conception where someone can be considered honest based on whether like he or she lies or not. But there are these two conceptions of honesty that we theorized. They co-occur, but they're separate, especially for the political discourse. They are manifested as belief speaking and fact speaking. And belief speaking is more based on intuition and feelings. Let me just make more space on my screen, sorry. Okay. As intuition and feelings, whereas fact speaking is more like an evidence-based approach. You may find both again in politics. So ideally, political discourse should go towards fact speaking, but this is not to say that belief speaking is bad. Even if there are bad things happen when politicians start to use belief speaking more. So the idea was to check how these two conceptions manifest in language, and by language I mean tweets, political tweets. And what happens when we relate these with information sharing? So yeah, very briefly, so we had a bunch of tweets, like 4 million tweets, covering a decade. This is the Honesty Project, and this is the US sample. And so we wanted to identify fact speaking and belief speaking in tweets, but also in the news articles that were shared in the tweets. And how we did that, it will be clear in a couple of slides. And also because we were interested both in how this conception are manifest in language, but also in the information shared, we needed a measure to gauge coach, no, that is gauge the accuracy of the news shared. So we use NewsGuard, which is a fact-checking company. So how did we identify the conceptions of honesty that we're talking about? And by the way, word of caution, if you hear me talking about truth-seeking, it's just the same as fact-speaking. It's just that we always called it truth-seeking, and just recently we switched to fact-speaking, which is more accurate, but still, I mean, I'm still used to call it truth-seeking, so forgive me for that. So the way we, very briefly, we identified these two conceptions, belief speaking and fact speaking, where we started with keywords list. Okay, so we brainstormed keywords, and these keywords were expanded using mostly word embeddings. And I'll talk about word embeddings in a bit. And they were validated with actually several surveys. So we asked people whether they think that a certain word belong to belief speaking or fact speaking or none of them. And so like it was kind of a robust approach. And these you see truth seeking is actually fact speaking is the same. So these are just some words taken from the list of keywords. We had 37 keywords for each of them. It was a nice coincidence, to be honest. And you can get an idea about what's in the dictionary. So there's more like intuition, more feelings in the belief speaking, and more like evidence-based approach, more accuracy, more science in truth seeking. So what we did is to get a sort of average representation of these two dictionaries, belief speaking and truth seeking, and we did that using word embeddings. Now, if you're not familiar with that, word embeddings are just a numerical representation of a word. Imagine a long vector with lots of numbers. Okay, that is basically what a word embedding is. And so because of numbers, you can do stuff like that. You can think of word embeddings, for example, as coordinates. You can use that as coordinates in a three-dimensional space, and you can see how close or how far are word pairs, for example. What we did is because we have numbers, we averaged them out. So we have, for example, the word embedding of basically, or believe, or claim. We created an average of that, so that we have a word embedding of belief speaking, okay? And we had the same for truth seeking or fact speaking. So we have these two central representations of these two conceptions. And so we compared how similar, using the cosine similarity, these two word embeddings were to the word embeddings of the tweets that we had. So with the tweets, we just, again, we had word embeddings of all the words within a tweet. We averaged them out. So we had word embedding of a tweet, word embedding of belief speaking, word embedding of truth seeking, and you see how similar are these between them. And so you get a score, basically. And just as an example, so these are tweets from Republican and Democrat politicians. We can see on top the belief speaking and on the bottom the fact speaking. Like this is, again, just examples. And if you read here the Republican, it says, Schiff definitely doesn't have an ironclad impeachment case, as he's desperately trying to suggest. You see, this is like talking from a surely not from an evidence-based point of view, but this is more like a feeling. Whereas on the bottom, you can read something like, we need to know how this pandemic started. I encourage whistleblowers who can inform a complete scientific and objective investigation. So this is like talking not only from an evidence point of view, but also with a willingness to be accurate. Yeah. So this is the frequency analysis, and I'll guide you through this. If we focus on graph E, you can see what happens in belief speaking over time. So this is from 2011, 12 up until now, basically. And you can see that, roughly speaking, both in Democrats and Republican belief speaking goes up in time. And it has a surge around, 2016. This is when Trump was elected. So you can see that there was a sort of spike, especially in Democrats, in talking with belief speaking approach. And then the two seems to go down after Biden was elected, which is the second dotted line. And this is when Republican seems to take over again in belief speaking usage. If you see on the bottom what happens with truth seeking, which is fact speaking, again, it's the same. There is again this surge. So maybe this was a sort of counterbalance for this, maybe because there were many belief speaking statements in the tweets that needed to be corrected with truth seeking or fact speaking approach. We don't necessarily know because there were 4 million tweets to look at. This spike is very interesting because this is due to COVID. Again, COVID really called politicians to talk with an more evidence-based point of view. On the left here, you have the sort of within subject, within politicians' projections. So what happens is you have this gray density plot. Here, this relates to the average within politician, this is for Democrats, of course, within politician usage of belief speaking from 2011 to 2013. And these are the same politicians, but like in 2016, 2019. So you can see that the usage shifted towards, more belief speaking. And this is the same for Republican. And you can see this is the same also for the other conception of honesty, namely fact speaking. So it increased over time, also within the same politicians. Now, I told you that this is cool, but it's not as cool as when we paired this with information sharing. Okay, this is a paper that was recently out in September in Nature Human Behavior. This is probably the main paper of the Honesty Project. And you can see how the honesty conceptions, belief speaking and fact speaking, are related to information sharing. And let me help you decipher this graph. So what you have here on the x-axis is the belief speaking score. Okay, so the more positive, the more the tweet goes towards belief speaking. And you have the same here, but about fact speaking or truth seeking again. So the more positive is the score, the more that tweet goes towards fact speaking here. What you see on the y-axis is the NewsGov score, namely the reliability of the domain of the piece of news shared in the tweet. So these are tweets that contain some news, okay, from New York Times, the Washington Post, whatever that is, or even from bad blogs and political blogs. And NewsGov, what NewsGov does is it gives a score of the domain of the. It's not like an article-based check. We don't know whether these are fake news or real news, but we know how reliable are the domain that that share the news. So what you can see that the more, especially only for Republican, the more the tweet goes towards belief speaking, the worse it gets in terms of reliability of news. Whereas on the right, you have quite the opposite. In case of Republicans, because Democrats are actually quite the same, but Republican, the more the tweet goes towards truth seeking, the better it gets in terms of reliability of news. And this is already quite cool. What we also did was, okay, the belief speaking and fact speaking similarity here are based on the tweets that contain a certain link to a certain article. So let's look at the articles as well. So we scraped the articles, I think a sample of article from the tweet. We checked the belief speaking and the fact speaking in them. And this is what happens with the articles. So you can see, again, articles shared by Republican that tend towards belief speaking, again, this is the article itself, it gets really bad in terms of quality. Okay, and this also shows a bit for Democrats, but not as bad as Republican, what is shared by Republican. Instead, articles that tends towards a more fact-speaking, discourse or framing gets a better NewsGov score. And again, if you want to have more details about this, you can try and because I haven't actually tested this, it should work, or at least grab a note of the title of this article where you can find more detail. So to sum up, we can say that belief speaking is a sort of gateway into misinformation. Okay, now I want to stress this enough. We're not saying that belief speaking is bad, okay, or it's inaccurate, or it has to be banned from political discourse, because political discourse is also performed through belief expressions, of course, like ideology. But what we're saying is just that it seems that belief speaking offers a way towards sharing misinformation that is especially exploited by Republicans, in this case, and not Democrats. And to this regard, it could be also interesting to replicate this in other countries, maybe that don't have a sort of binary party classification, but they have more than one party, more than two parties actually. So, but we haven't done that yet, and I think that PRODEMINFO could potentially do this. Truth-seeking, fact-speaking rhetoric, by contrast, it seems that it constrains whoever shares a piece of news on Twitter to be more accurate, or to share more accurate news, irrespective of partisanship. So the question could be what drives what? Because we found a relation between derogatory language, or better, negative emotions and belief speaking, okay, what is driving both? So we tried a few mediation analyses to see what was driving the effect, but we didn't actually find anything like very clear. It seems though that negative emotions that are associated with derogation of the opponent, like drive the association belief speaking and low quality content. And a reason for that could be that maybe in the case of Republican, they want to derogate the opponent, not the Democrats, so they share like bad news. But because bad news is not that evidence-based, they have to resort to belief speaking. So it's sort of, low quality content again offers the desired derogation of Democrats. And this seems to confirm what happens, for example, in a recent paper by Osmundson that showed that actually sharing fake news is mostly driven by, having a desire for derogation of the other party. So there's this desire, and it gets like manifested through belief speaking, because possibly in the case of Republicans, it can be in another way. I'll pause here in case there are any questions, because it's funny because I have to look. I have the presentation there, but I have Zoom here, so I don't see there's anything in the chat or any questions. So feel free. Oh, look, please.
Hello, just playing devil's advocate here. Could it be that the NewsGuard algorithm, or how this was analyzed, has a level of political bias built into it, which skews the results in terms of the belief speaking and the quality of the articles on the Republican side? Could it be that they're not inherently more less fact-based, but due to the biases within the technology used?
Thank you very much for the question. It's really interesting. I think that, so NewsGuard classification regards like thousands of domains. Like again, it even goes to blog levels. Like sometimes if the blog is particularly known, and I think that that could be like a correlation where even generally speaking, Democrats. Well, we actually have a paper on that shows how Republicans are really share more misinformation even when compared to other conservative parties in Europe, for example. So of course they resort to bad piece of news, but I'm not sure about the relationship with news quality and belief speaking, because again, it's not NewsGuard doesn't check the articles themselves. He says several dozens of criteria that that gives out this final score when analyzing the domain. So it's not only this domain actually shares fake news, but how transparent it is in terms of organization, in terms of banner for advertisement and stuff like that. So I think it's varied enough not to be too tied to belief speaking or fact speaking. But I think there could be like a relation. Even if I think that it also happens for. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the lines for Democrats, there's something here as well. Okay, so if the articles, even when shared by Democrats, goes towards belief speaking, but I don't think it is that strong. That NewsGuard score is automatically bad when something is belief speaking. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. It was more to do with like the criteria that's set out when it analyzes the articles, whether or not the people who developed it had any political biases which may have implicitly been transferred into the technology.
Not in theory, also because we double checked this with another sort of fact checking database, and it basically led to the same result.
Cool.
So, Alan, I see your. Hello.
I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah,
thanks very much for this presentation. I was on the board of advisors for the overall Honesty Project at Wake Forest on the philosophy side, so it was really exciting to see this paper. One question I had was, it seems super clear that there's a kind of connection here between, say, belief speaking and fact speaking on the one hand, and say the likelihood of accuracy in the information that's being used. But I wasn't 100% sure what that tells me about honesty, like the honesty of the people sharing the information. I wondered if an alternative explanation would be You know, when I lapse into belief speaking, it's because I really care about the topic. And if I really care about the topic, I'm more likely to just be convinced by the information. So, you know, it might be that the people that are sharing what turns out to be less accurate information are nevertheless themselves convinced by it, such that they're not, you know, they're not being dishonest in any way. It's just that belief speaking tends to trend towards slightly more kind of emotional engagement. And if you care about something, you're much more easily convinced by information that seems to support your view. And that would be kind of compatible with the person being honest. It's just that they've also been tricked by the inaccurate information that they've then gone on to share.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. I think in the end, like, we cannot really tell if someone is honest or not. I mean, even if we look at a tweet, we cannot ask the person who wrote the tweet, do you really believe what you said, or something like that. So I think we have to sort of stop like a step before that. But I think what we're trying to say here, what we're trying to look at is that belief speaking, I think, offers a better gateway from misinformation in the terms of I can say something like, I don't know, for me the earth is flat, like, basically the earth is flat or something like that. That could be like classified as belief speaking and not fact speaking, because I'm not talking from an evidence-based point of view, and people can still say I'm honest. But am I honest? I mean, I'm honest because I'm could be coherent with my thoughts, but I'm not honest because I'm not telling the truth about, you know, the earth being flat, actually.
All right. Maybe this is just a difference across different disciplines then. I wouldn't have thought that honesty requires truth, because that's kind of, you know, it kind of just requires kind of faithfully reporting what you believe.
Yeah, but that is a really interesting.
You might be being wrong doesn't make you dishonest, I guess was the thought. No, I don't want to take up too much time, but I'd be really interested to talk some more about the honesty stuff at some point.
Sure, yeah, because we had these discussions already with again with philosophers when I was presenting this in the US, and it's really interesting to look at that. And I think also that a little shift in focus can be given by PRODEMINFO, which actually looks at the conception of truth and not honesty. And there is a graph that should sort of clarify the difference between the two projects at the end of this presentation, or towards the end of this presentation. So maybe things will be a little bit clear, but yes, thank you very much for your insights.
No worries, thanks.
Thank you. So I'll try to go on because there's still a few slides to go. We went through this. Okay, so now I'm going to present quite quickly a work in progress I'm working on. So we're looking at, so we know that, again, we're looking at political discourse here, basically, and we know that much of the political discourse is manifested through language, and this language can be used in a bad way or in a good way. A good way, for example, could be the example of the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, you know, that she was praised for being transparent with New Zealanders when COVID happens. And on the other side, we can have people like Bolsonaro telling that there is clinical studies where you see that you can treat COVID with antimalaric. So what was this? This is just an introduction to a change of shift in focus. So up until now, we focused on the politicians themselves and the news they share. But what happens on the other side of the equation, meaning the people that actually reply to that tweet? So this was the question of this part of the Honesty Project. So how do people react to different concepts of honesty? And there are two questions actually that we try to answer. And this is still a work in progress. I'm mostly working on it, so this is why it's still late. And there are two analyses. So one is how the people that actually reply to those tweets, the political tweets that we collected, align in terms of honesty conceptions. So if there's a tweet in belief speaking, how do people reply? Do they reply belief speaking, or do they try to counteract that with a fact speaking narrative or something? And also how these two honesty conceptions in the tweet have, whether they have they are correlated with affective polarization in reply. So what happens in terms of affective polarization? And the link here is very nice because there are studies that even causally relate affective polarization and misinformation sharing by politicians, in the case especially of Trump. So we wanted to look at this, talking about replies here. Oh, just a mention, so you've seen seeds, you're probably wondering what are seeds. Seeds are just how we are calling tweets in this study. Okay, just because technically a reply is also a tweet. So seeds here is just a tweet written by a politician, okay? And the replies is just the replies to that seed. So because we're talking about a conversation, so we thought it was conceptually nice to call a tweet like a seed of a conversation. So very, very quickly, this is the data we collected. We grabbed a random sample of tweets from the tweets that I've shown you before from the previous studies. We filter out second-level replies, meaning replies to other users. We were only interested in replies to the politician. And also we kept just one observation, one reply, the first in chronological order per replier. So in the data set, even though these are all replies, for this study, this is the reply that we are interested in because it directly answers this tweet, or better, this seed. Okay, and these are just a few numbers, so there were 100,000 of replies by 10,000 different seeds. Also, another thing I'm going to mention is the FMB score. You will see this in graphs that are coming in the next slide. FMB score just stays, it's an acronym for fact minus belief. So this is how it's calculated. Whereas where before we had belief speaking and fact speaking in two different scores, here we're just subtracting one from another just to have that one score. What happens is that when the FMB score is negative, it means that the tweet goes towards belief speaking, and when, on the contrary, that is positive, it goes towards fact speaking. Okay, but it's just the same concept. It's just another way to come up with a one score instead of two. For the polarization, affective polarization scores, we also have a score, and we follow just the same dictionary-based approach. So we used a dictionary developed by Almond, and we had this sort of average representation of this polarization dictionary, and we calculated the cosine similarity between the replies, the seeds as well, and this dictionary in order to have an affective polarization score. And these are just examples. So this is, for example, in theory, affective polarized charge seed. Okay, when politicians push soft and crime policies and treat policies like criminals, violence follows. But it's very rushing through the methods because I don't want to steal time from the PRODEMINFO presentation as well. So these are the results. So this is the results of the contagion analysis, which is just the alignment of honesty conceptions between the replies and the seeds. So I'll guide you through this. On the x-axis, you have the fact minus beliefs score of the seed. So again, if this is positive, it means that the seed, the politician's tweet, goes towards fact-speaking narrative. If it's negative, it goes towards belief-speaking. On the y-axis, you have the same score, but in replies. And you can see there's a nice correlation between what is in the seed and what is in the reply. So we can talk about a sort of contagion, in place. You see two panels because this is what happens when Democrats write the seed. This is what happens when Republicans write the seed. So you may be wondering, okay, what are these three colored lines? These three colored lines are color-coded based on the ideology, political ideology of the people that actually reply. So of course, as you may expect, the blue line here represents what happens in more liberal repliers, and the red line here and here as well. It represents what happens to more conservative people that actually engage with this seed. So there's a positive association between same type conceptions. You can see that the contagion effect, so this correlation is stronger in Democrat seeds. You can see the slope is more inclined. And also if you squint enough, maybe it's better to see, it's better to focus on this right side panel. There is a stronger contagion in place when party of whoever writes the seed is equal to the ideology of whoever replies to that seed. So you can see here, for example, the line that is more inclined is the red line, meaning that when repliers are more conservative, are more subject to this sort of contagion. So they tend to align more with the honesty narrative within the seed. The second part of the study focused on the relationship with honesty conceptions and polarization. So let's look at that. What you have here again is the x-axis, it's the fact minus belief seed of the seed. Again, if positive, it goes towards fact speaking. And you have the effective polarization of the replies represented from a score that, well, this is actually normalized, so it doesn't go from 0 to 1, but anyway. And you can see how nicely, like the polarization, effective polarization in the replies decreases, the more the seed actually approaches a fact-speaking narrative. And this is particularly true with seed written by the Democrats. So now the lines are color-coded based on the party of the politician that wrote the seed. What happens now on the right is just another graph, another significant interaction we found. This simply means that, you know, the language gets more polarized when the politician or the party that writes the seed is not equal to the ideology of the replier. So basically, this just means that Democrats tend to get more effective comments from more conservative repliers, and Republicans tend to get, you know, more effectively polarized content from more liberal replies. So this is just nice, probably confirmation, something that we could already expect. We also had a look at topics. So this is like a sort of corollary. What about when we take into consideration like controversial topics? By controversial topics, I mean like some issue polarizing topics like abortion and climate change. Now, I don't want to spend much time about how we calculate the controversiality, so it would be nice if you have questions, just ask. So these are just examples, you know, controversial topics in our data set. These are non-controversial topics, for example. What happens is when we look at this, we calculated these topics, in 4 different topic modeling at different resolutions. So 20, 40 topics, 60 topics, 80 topics, and we measured for each topic the sort of controversiality. And you can see that the more a topic in a seed is controversial, the better the effect of the fact-speaking narrative on the polarization. So let me rewind. You have on the x-axis again the fact minus belief of the seed. You know, the more positive, the more goes towards fact-speaking, and you have the polarization in the replies. Now, it always goes down, as we've seen before, but it's even better when we are dealing with controversial topics. This is what it means. Okay. So these are all significant interactions. So there's a more controversial topics show a steeper slope of depolarization. So just to sum up, yeah, we can see that, I mean, the whole tone of this analysis, that what it shows is that there is a sort of contagion in place. So whenever, you know, politician opts for belief speaking or fact speaking, other follows. And some may say, well, this is not anything new. And in linguistics, this is known as, I don't know, heteroglossia or emotional contagion in psychology. Well, that's true, but there's also good news, because it means that, you know, employing ideally a truth-seeking or better a fact-speaking narrative seems, you know, effective in making the conversation healthier, you know, especially when topics get controversial. Again, belief speaking is not a bad narrative per se, but as shown with the previous analysis, it can be used as a sort of bad narrative, you know, because I mean things get more heated when talking about beliefs, but they really should not, because here we are talking about affective polarization, so insults, you know, hate speech. We're not talking about simply issue polarization. So what can we do? One may ask about this. Well, we could raise awareness in politicians. This is a nice study there was a nice study by Ian Reifler in 2014 that showed that when, well, I won't go into details, but when politicians are held accountable for their words, for their language, for the accuracy of what they say, they actually care. They actually do care about a potential loss, or at least they cared in 2014. I don't know, I'm not sure about now. So they actually do care about a potential loss of electorate. And also we can raise awareness in people. And this is where surgery students are coming, well, 2 of them at least, are working right now. We have a pilot study showing that we can actually sort of force people in a survey to adopt either fact-speaking or belief-speaking perspective. So it's a perspective-taking analysis. And you can see that this pilot study seems to suggest that the people that are asked to adopt a fact-speaking perspective are able to identify belief-speaking tweets. And not only that, but they also consider those to be less honest when compared to control group and the people that instead are put into the other perspective, the belief-speaking perspective. So this could also be a nice implementation potentially on social media. So I will slowly slide towards PRODEMINFO now. This was the Honesty Project, and again, it has handed. PRODEMINFO is very similar to Honesty. You know, it focuses on truth rather than honesty. So this is a nice graph that Almog created, and you can see on the right we have belief speaking and fact speaking, so the two conceptions I'm talking about. But it seems that the focus here is more on the person. You know, the honesty is something more like inner based, whereas the PRODEMINFO should focus more on truth. You know, in fact, we don't talk about belief speaking and fact speaking, but we talk about intuition and evidence. Now, of course, there are correlations between these two, but they're not entirely the same thing. In fact, the dictionary don't really overlap that much. And it's a 5-year project that focuses not on the US dataset, but a UK dataset, Italian, German, and Spanish datasets. And these are the main objectives. So they're more or less the same of the Honesty Project, but there's also the addition of developing counter messages to help people recognize this kind of stuff. And now I'll leave space to Christoph because he's more up to date compared with me as to like recent stages of PRODEMINFO. So Christoph, it's up to you now.
Great, thank you. So Fabio already did the introduction of the structure. As you can see now, we are basically having various different aspects we're covering in PRODEMINFO. And I briefly introduced 3 work packages that basically cover the first part of the project, which address people's understanding of truths. Next slide, please.
Yes.
Okay, so I just presented 3 work packages I am involved in, which is the public discourse versus personal attitudes, which basically consists of the development of the evidence intuition scale, which we use to measure people's understanding as more leaning towards evidence or more leaning towards intuition. And for this first section, the ICE is basically covering truth understanding based on psychometrics. The second work package is public discourse versus personal tweets, in which we collect people's tweets and compute the evidence minus intuition score, which is basically the same as the I think it was the truth minus belief speaking score, right?
The FMB score. Yeah.
Exactly. So the nomenclature is rather new, so we're still figuring it out. And we're collecting data in 5 countries: in Germany, Hungary, Italy, Spain, and the UK. So 4 of these countries are already finalized, and we're still waiting for data coming from Hungary. And in the second work package, we analyze people's understanding of truth based on everyday communication, text-based everyday communication, which is basically just people's behavior on social media as expressed through their tweets. And the final work package is truth in people's own words, in which we analyze a written text to a controversial topic, in this case, vaccine, and relate it to the EMI score. And this final package, compared to the prior package, is working on text that expresses a certain opinion. So we have more or less a generalized written communication behavior through the tweets, which covers a lot, basically everything. And now we have something that demands people to provide evidence, to provide arguments. And in this case here, on a very controversial topic. So next slide. So let's start with 1.4, which consisted of the development of the evidence intuition scale. It's based on various items from already validated scales. Just to give you a few examples: actively open-minded thinking, conspiracy mentality, epistemic beliefs, preferences, political engagement, populist attitudes, stuff like that. Plus, we have a couple of items on political ideology, subjective social status, as well as satisfaction. And just to give you an idea of what that means, so the one of the items for the epistemic beliefs asks people whether they think evidence is more important than whether something feels true. Psychological reactance: I consider advice from others to be an intrusion. And epistemic preferences: I only believe people who are sincere and say what they really think. So this notion of evidence and intuition becomes quite clear within those items already. And we started with quite a lot of items, boiled them down based on factor analysis, and ended up with roughly 50 items, which we have then rolled out in those different countries. Exactly. In 1.5, this is what we used to collect the tweets, which you can imagine is, given all the problems related to collecting data on Twitter, was quite a challenge, but we pulled it off in most countries. But due to several restrictions in terms of privacy and what we can actually ask people, so for example, if you use Prolific, you cannot ask people for the Twitter handles, but we used a provider that allowed us to do this. But we had to accept that people can't provide or give us non-existent Twitter handles. So although we have 1,000 people for every country, we only have fraction of that for the respective valid Twitter handles. And valid Twitter handle means the Twitter account exists and it tweeted at least 10 times. And that resulted in 292 valid handles for Germany, 449 valid handles for Italy, 551 for Spain, and 600 something for the UK. Then we used, and we're still working on that, the analytical approach, basically Fabio described already, dictionary-based, or something that is close to dictionary-based, but instead of like deriving or creating a new dictionary, we use the a contextualized construct representation approach, which basically just uses the item text instead of a newly developed dictionary, but otherwise it does the same, and correlate it with the evidence intuition scale items. That's what we're currently working on. And what we in the meantime, before like the data connection came to an end or proceeded, we tried to, well, we were lucky to use data from the JitsuVax project, which basically researches people's attitudes towards vaccinations. And participants in that project were very opinionated about vaccination, and they were asked, aside from various psychological measures, to provide a text on vaccination. And we kindly could use that text to analyze the data, again, derive an EMI score, and try to correlate it with the behavioral measures. We could also retest people. So the initial data set had some of the evidence intuition scale items in it, but not all of them. So we just retested people, got the missing items, and now have the full set plus the text. Again, we tried DDR, CCR, and some other things, but Segun could provide much more info on that because we're still figuring out what works best. Because if you look at the next slide, most of you have seen that graph quite a number of times already, but just to give you an idea that like the whole evidence intuition scale actually more or less works from a correlational perspective. You see all these scales at scale level, so all items aggregated. Sometimes scale aggregation didn't work because the psychometric properties didn't match higher level aggregation or didn't suit higher level aggregation. And normally we would try to, when correlating it with the evidence minus intuition score, you would compute the final score. But just to illustrate here, I also added the evidence intuition score, and the evidence and intuition score, and as well as the combined score. However, that's why we're still using or still trying some different things. You can see the correlations are not super high. So only statistically significant correlations are displayed. And while the psychometric variables work quite nicely, as you would expect them. So for example, the epistemic accuracy is negatively correlated with the evident epistemic beliefs about truth in or faith in people's intuitions. So the more people think their intuition is better than evidence, the less they prefer accurate information. So that works perfectly fine, but the correlations are unfortunately very low. So we're currently trying to figure out different analytical approaches and also then compare between countries, but that might take some more time, but we're making progress, I would say. And just to give you an idea how those strongly opinionated people think in terms of epistemic preferences, I brought a histogram I found very interesting. On the left side, you see all the items measuring epistemic accuracy and the other epistemic sincerity. And sincerity meaning basically our intuition score, accuracy, our evidence score. And you see very nicely that those very strongly opinionated people are not exactly concerned about accuracy. So 1 very low agreement, 7 very high agreement. And while the sincerity measures are more leaning towards the higher scores, the accuracy scores are not as important for most people. So I think that gives a nice and interesting picture that if you ask strongly opinionated people, you can actually, especially depending on the topic, of course, but in the vaccination case, just by looking at the histograms, you can already get an impression of what people prefer in terms of their evidence over intuition. Yeah, that was it from me. Just a brief dive into what we're currently working on. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing the screen now so that I can see you all. So yeah, we have quite a few minutes actually for questions. So please ask if you have any. Well, that's what I asked a question just to realize about how. Can you remind me, Christoph, or even Sigmund, what are we looking at to improve those correlation a bit that you showed in one of the last slides? Like, can we do something to improve that?
So probably Sigmund is the yeah.
Hello, Sigmund.
Sigmund can answer that a lot better than I can.
We can hear you, Sigmund. You're muted.
You're still muted.
Well, I'm not sure I have the answer more than you do. I mean, so it's interesting because what we're looking now into in the data is we're looking at correlations at the moment. And another area we're exploring is whether, I mean, with correlations, we assume that there are linear relationships everywhere, but we don't actually know. So probably there are nonlinear relationships. I'll probably model this a bit with stepwise regression, just to see what we pick up from there. I mean, it's just analytical at this point. We have the data to play around with.
Okay,
I think that's the best I can say now. I mean, if anybody also in the audience has suggestions for us, it would be nice also to put that as part of our upper 12 things to do.
Angelo.
Yeah, I think yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
Yeah. Are the correlations low across all countries?
Yeah, basically yes.
Okay, so it's something that replicates across countries. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. That's
It
very
changes slightly. So in some countries, other variables are statistically significant, but like the overall size of the correlations is it's not good.
And the aim of the analysis is to develop like a scale.
So basically,
like a psychometric measure, right?
That, and to show that you can actually derive people's different understandings of truth from text.
Yeah. What are you doing to try to validate that, like a factor analysis, or I mean, do you have a factor structure in mind? Is exploratory, or you are trying to confirm a model or theoretical model you have in mind?
So basically, of course, what would be nice and which also largely works is to have a factor structure with 2 factors, one evidence, one tradition factor, that works more or less in most countries. But
Okay.
so that is one part, but the more important part is actually to show, okay, you can differentiate between different understandings of truth, and you can find those in text.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but it's very interesting to find such low correlations. It's very intriguing. Yeah. Yeah. It's like people don't have like a very clear picture of their own pattern of responses, right? Like they are, yeah.
But Christoph, sorry if I ask, like, because now I'm getting confused. So the correlation, like we saw, like when we have the EMI score, is that like a psychometric measure that we measure through survey, or is that what we try to extract from the text?
That's what we extract from the text.
Okay. From the Jitsu text.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the same holds for so we did the analysis also for tweets for the UK, and even there the correlations were quite low. So nothing higher than 0.13 or something.
Oh, okay.
And reducing the number of items and getting rid of the ones with low loadings, are you able to feed a two-factor extractor?
So that's what we already did. So in the initial scale, we had like 70 something items, and we cut all items that had low factor loadings. We could like get even closer, and probably should do to have like a shorter item version and a clearer factor structure, because if from like an experimental perspective, 2 factors work, but the algorithm actually suggests 5. So yeah, there's still some things you could cut if you want to.
Is there any other question? Well, I don't know, if not, we almost, like, we can end this like 5 minutes earlier. I think it's also lunchtime. So if there's no question left, so I will thank you all for being here, and I'll stop recording now. Am I? Yeah, okay. Yes.